Chapter 1. The Unmarked Grave. The earth was cold and yielding, a dark, inviting maw. The man, his breath misting in the pre-dawn chill, gripped the shovel tighter. Each downward thrust was a defiant act against the silent morning. The ground, undisturbed for decades, protested with stubborn resistance. With every labored heave, a piece of the earth's ancient skin was peeled away. A grave, they had said, a forgotten soul, lost to time. But there was no marker, no name, no story. Just a cold, empty promise of rest. The man, a stranger to this place and its secrets, felt a peculiar pull, a morbid curiosity that gnawed at him. As the pit deepened, a sense of unease crept into him. It was as if the earth itself was reluctant to surrender its dead. The shovel connected with something solid, something unnatural. A thrill of anticipation and dread coursed through him. With trembling hands, he cleared the dirt. Beneath the surface lay a coffin, its wood weathered and worn. It was smaller than a standard grave, almost childlike in its proportions. A cold dread seized him as he realized the implications. This was no ordinary burial. A chill wind seemed to whisper through the trees, carrying with it an ancient, mournful dirge. The man hesitated, a battle raging within him. Fear warred with an insatiable curiosity. With a final, desperate surge of courage, he pried open the lid. A wave of decay and despair washed over him. Inside, nestled in a shroud of worn linen, lay the remains of a child. Tiny bones, fragile and incomplete, seemed to mock the passage of time. A profound sorrow enveloped the man. Who was this child? How had they met such a cruel fate? As the first rays of dawn touched the grave, casting long, eerie shadows, a feeling of deep wrong crept into his heart. He had disturbed a peace that should have remained unbroken, and in doing so, he had awakened something sinister, something ancient and hungry. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Corner. Nights following the grave's desecration were no longer cloaked in peaceful darkness. A sinister chill crept into the house, a cold, insidious presence that seemed to seep through the very walls. Shadows, once innocuous, began to take on sinister shapes, contorting and dancing in the flickering candlelight. The man, haunted by the child's fate, found no solace in sleep. His dreams were filled with desolate landscapes and mournful wails. He would wake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, to find the room suffused in an eerie, unnatural light. A new awareness crept into his life. Sounds, once ignored, now carried chilling significance. A creak, a whisper, a phantom footstep. Each noise was a phantom limb reaching out to touch him. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of shadows and dread. Days turned into a blur of endless vigil. He moved through the house like a ghost, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The corners of his vision seemed to blur, and fleeting glimpses of unseen figures haunted his peripheral sight. A particular room, a nursery at the end of the hall, drew him with an irresistible force. It was there, he felt, that the child's essence lingered. As he stepped over the threshold, a wave of icy despair washed over him. The room was devoid of furniture, save for a rocking chair placed eerily in the center. A cold draft swept through the room, igniting the feeble candle flame. The shadows danced with renewed vigor, taking on grotesque forms. A child's laughter, sweet and yet chilling, echoed in the empty space. The man's heart pounded in his ears as he felt a presence near, a malevolent force that seemed to relish his fear. Chapter 3. The Watchful Eyes. A sense of being watched permeated every corner of the house. Shadows seemed to coalesce into eyes, burning into his consciousness. They were everywhere, in the flickering firelight, in the murky depths of mirrors and in the corners of his vision. Sleep became a fleeting respite, a battleground between consciousness and terror. In the dark, his mind conjured grotesque images, pale, skeletal figures with eyes that glowed an unnatural blue. They seemed to hover at the foot of the bed, their silent scrutiny a heavy weight upon his chest. Days blurred into nights, each one a descent deeper into madness. The house creaked and groaned, as if alive with unseen entities. Doors opened and closed without human intervention, and objects moved of their own volition. A cold draft, carrying with it the scent of decay, swept through the house, leaving in its wake a chilling emptiness. The man was a prisoner in his own home. He dared not venture outside, fearing what might lurk in the shadows of the night. The world beyond his walls seemed a distant, unreachable place. His only companions were the ghosts of his own mind and the unseen presences that haunted his every step. A growing desperation consumed him. He was trapped in a living nightmare, a prisoner of his own fear. The child's grave, a foolish act of curiosity, had unleashed a horror beyond comprehension. And now, as the days turned into weeks, he realized that there was no escape, only a deepening despair and the chilling certainty that he was not alone. Chapter 4: Echoes of the Past. A haunting silence enveloped the house, broken only by the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each passing moment an eternity of dread. The man found himself drawn to the attic, a forbidden realm filled with shadows and the scent of decay. Dust-covered relics whispered tales of lives lived and lost. Old photographs, yellowed with age, revealed the house's history. Families, long gone, stared out with vacant eyes, their lives frozen in time. A child, eerily similar to the one buried in the unmarked grave, laughed from a faded image, a stark contrast to the chilling atmosphere. As he delved deeper into the attic, a strange energy pulsed through the air. A feeling of being watched intensified, and the shadows seemed to converge, forming grotesque, inhuman shapes. A cold draft, carrying with it the faintest whisper of a child's laughter, sent shivers down his spine. He stumbled upon a hidden compartment, a dark recess filled with forgotten items. Among the clutter, he found a diary, its leather cover embossed with intricate gold lettering. Its pages were filled with a woman's elegant script, a record of a life lived in this house. But there were entries that chilled him to the bone. References to a child, lost to illness, buried in the garden. A sense of profound sorrow and guilt washed over him. He had disturbed not just a grave, but a family's shattered heart. As he read on, the diary revealed a darker tale. The woman, consumed by grief, had descended into madness. Her words became increasingly erratic, filled with references to shadows and unseen presences. The house, she wrote, was not a place of refuge, but a prison of despair. A chilling realization dawned upon him. The child he had unearthed was perhaps not a victim of foul play, but a tragic casualty of illness and grief. Yet, in disturbing the grave, he had unleashed something far more sinister. Chapter 5: The Creaking Floorboards. The house was alive with insidious sounds. Walls whispered, floors groaned, and shadows seemed to shift with a life of their own. But it was the floorboards that held the most terrifying symphony. Their creaks and groans were not the benign sounds of an aging house. They were the ominous rhythms of an unseen presence. At night, the house transformed into a haunted orchestra. Each creak was a note in a macabre melody, a haunting dirge that filled the man with dread. He would lie awake, heart pounding, listening to the insidious symphony. Sometimes the creaks would crescendo, a cacophony of terror that sent chills down his spine. The floorboards of the nursery were the worst. They seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, their creaks punctuated by eerie silence. As days turned into nights, the man found himself drawn to the room, compelled to confront the terror that lurked within. With a heavy heart, he stepped into the nursery. The floorboards protested under his weight, their creaks echoing in the still night. A cold draft swept through the room, igniting a flicker of fear. As he stood in the center of the room, the floorboards seemed to converge around him, creating a circle of dread. The house held its breath, and then, in the suffocating silence, a single, piercing creak echoed through the room. A shadow, darker than any other, moved across the wall. The man's heart froze. He was not alone. Chapter 6. The Forbidden Attic. The attic was a realm of shadows and forgotten echoes. A steep, winding staircase led to its darkened maw, a portal to a world untouched by time. Its air was thick with the scent of decay and dust, a chilling embrace that tightened around the man as he ascended. Cobwebs draped like ghostly veils, obscuring the outlines of forgotten treasures. Shadows danced and writhed on the sloping walls, taking on grotesque shapes in the dim light. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting an eerie glow that amplified the shadow's menace. As he ventured deeper, the attic revealed its secrets. Trunks, overflowing with the remnants of lives past, stood like silent sentinels. Clothing, yellowed and fragile, hung from rusty hooks, their spectral forms swaying in the non-existent breeze. A grand piano, its keys frozen in time, stood as a mournful monument to forgotten melodies. A child's room, preserved in a moment of childhood, was a chilling tableau. Tiny toys lay scattered on the floor, a macabre reminder of innocence lost. A doll, its eyes vacant and haunting, stared out from a darkened corner. The room was a mausoleum of childhood, a place where joy had died a long, agonizing death. A cold dread crept into the man's heart as he realized he was not alone. The attic was a repository of sorrow, a place where the echoes of the past lingered, dark and menacing. He felt a presence, a malevolent force that watched his every move. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in, forming a suffocating embrace. The attic was no longer a place of forgotten treasures. It was a gateway to a realm of pure terror. Chapter 7. The Blood-Stained Diary. A peculiar magnetism drew him to a hidden compartment, a dark recess nestled within the attic's labyrinth. With trembling hands, he pried it open, revealing a small, leather-bound diary. Its cover was embossed with intricate gold lettering, the script faded and worn. As he opened it, a wave of nausea washed over him. The pages were filled with a woman's elegant script, but the words were stained with dark crimson blotches. The diary was a window into a world of madness and despair. The woman's handwriting, once fluid and graceful, grew increasingly erratic as the pages turned. Her words were filled with a haunting obsession with her child, a desperate plea for a life beyond suffering. The diary became a chilling chronicle of a descent into darkness, a testament to the power of grief and the fragility of the human mind. As he delved deeper into the diary, the horror intensified. The woman described a growing darkness within the house, a malevolent presence that fed on her despair. She wrote of shadows that took on human form, of whispers in the night, and of a cold dread that consumed her. The diary became a chilling blueprint of the terror that now gripped the man. Then, the entries took a sinister turn. The woman began to describe rituals, dark invocations that promised to bring her child back from the grave. The pages were filled with cryptic symbols and disturbing imagery. It was as if she had made a pact with the darkness, a bargain that had a terrible price. And as he read on, the man realized with a sickening dread that he had become a part of that pact, an unwitting player in a horrifying tragedy. Chapter 8. The Midnight Visitor. Night was a living entity in the house, a malevolent force that crept into every corner. Sleep was a fragile oasis, besieged by shadows and eerie sounds. The man lay awake, his senses heightened, listening to the house breathe. A floorboard creaked, a window rattled, and a cold draft seemed to seep through the walls. Then, a sound shattered the silence, a soft footstep, followed by another. It was as if someone was moving through the house, their presence a tangible weight in the night. Fear, cold and insidious, crept into the man's heart. He held his breath, straining to hear the next sound. A door creaked open, then closed softly. The footsteps drew closer, each step an echo of impending doom. The man's heart pounded in his ears, a deafening rhythm in the silent house. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, but there was nothing to see, only the oppressive weight of fear. The footsteps stopped outside his door. A moment of infinite suspense passed, and then, a soft knock. The man's breath caught in his throat. He was alone in the house. There was no one there. Yet, the knock was undeniable, a cold touch on the fabric of reality. With trembling hands, he reached for the doorknob. It was cold to the touch, as if touched by icy fingers. He opened the door slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness. There was nothing, no one, just the endless expanse of night. But as he closed the door, a shadow moved in the corner of his eye. A child's face, pale and spectral, seemed to gaze at him from the darkness. The door slammed shut, and the house erupted in a cacophony of terror. Chapter 9. The Uninvited Guest. A cold dread had become the man's constant companion. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a prison of shadows and whispers. He moved through its rooms like a ghost, his senses heightened, his mind a battleground of fear and desperation. A sense of intrusion grew with each passing hour. It was as if an unseen presence had taken up residence, a malevolent entity that watched and waited. Objects were displaced, doors creaked open, and shadows seemed to shift and morph with an eerie intelligence. The man began to see things, fleeting glimpses of a child, a spectral figure that flitted through the corners of his vision. At first, it was a trick of the light, a figment of a tortured mind. But as days turned into nights, the visions became more frequent, more vivid. The child was no longer a ghost in the periphery. It was a tangible presence, a silent observer of his torment. A chilling realization crept into his mind. He was not alone in the house. There was something else, something sinister that shared his space. It was a presence that fed on fear, a malevolent force that had been awakened by his intrusion into the child's grave. And now, it was claiming the house as its own, a haunting reminder of the terrible mistake he had made. The man was trapped in a living nightmare, a prisoner in his own home. The outside world seemed a distant, unreachable place. His only reality was the house, its creaking floorboards, its whispering walls, and the unseen presence that stalked its corridors. There was no escape, only a deepening despair and the chilling certainty that he was not alone. Chapter 10. The Descending Darkness. Darkness was a tangible entity, a creeping shadow that consumed the house. It was no longer the absence of light, but a malevolent force, a living, breathing thing. It seeped into the rooms, a cold, suffocating blanket that extinguished hope. Windows, once portals to the outside world, became black voids, reflecting the darkness within. The house was a tomb, sealed off from the living world. Time lost its meaning in this perpetual night, each moment a heavy, oppressive weight. The man was a shadow within a shadow, a ghost haunting his own existence. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if wading through a viscous liquid. Fear had transformed him into a creature of habit, his days a monotonous cycle of survival. A sense of impending doom hung heavy in the air. It was as if the house itself was aware of a coming reckoning, a final confrontation with the darkness that had taken residence within its walls. The floorboards groaned with anticipation, the walls seemed to close in, and the shadows danced with a sinister purpose. The man was alone, utterly and completely alone. The child's spectral presence had faded, replaced by a more sinister entity. A cold, inhuman intelligence seemed to permeate the house, a malevolent consciousness that watched and waited. The darkness was gathering, a storm brewing within the confines of the house, and the man, trapped in its heart, could only wait, a terrified spectator to his own demise. Chapter 11. The Unbreakable Chain. A cold, metallic sensation crept over him, a binding force that seeped into his skin. It was as if invisible chains were being forged, link by link, binding him to the house, to the darkness. He moved, but it was as if he were pulled by unseen hands, a puppet on invisible strings. The house had become a prison, its walls closing in, its shadows growing more menacing. Every room was a cell, every corner a potential ambush. The man was a prisoner of his own fear, trapped in a labyrinth of dread. The days blurred into a single, endless night. Time had lost all meaning, replaced by a relentless ticking of a mental clock, counting down to an unknown, terrifying end. He existed in a state of perpetual twilight, his senses dulled by despair. The child's spectral form appeared more frequently, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had unleashed this horror. But now, the child was different, its eyes holding a cold, knowing intelligence. It seemed to be a part of the darkness, a silent accomplice in his torment. The house creaked and groaned, its timbers alive with a sinister energy. A cold draft swept through the rooms, carrying with it the scent of decay and fear. The man was a solitary figure in a world of shadows, a captive audience to the house's macabre performance. There was no escape, no hope, only the relentless tightening of the invisible chains that bound him to a living nightmare. Chapter 12. The Haunting Lullaby. A melody, ethereal and haunting, crept into the house. It was a lullaby, sweet and sorrowful, carried on the cold night air. It was a song of innocence lost, a mournful dirge for a life cut short. The man, drawn to the sound, wandered through the house, searching for its source. The melody grew louder, filling the rooms with a chilling beauty. It was a song of longing, of despair, and of a love that knew no bounds. The man's heart ached with a sorrow not his own, as if the melody was reaching into his soul, stirring forgotten memories. The lullaby seemed to emanate from the nursery, a siren song calling him to his doom. With trembling steps, he entered the room, the melody growing stronger with each step. The rocking chair, once a silent sentinel, now swayed gently, as if cradling an invisible child. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of jasmine. The lullaby reached a crescendo, a heart-wrenching plea for solace. The man's vision blurred as tears streamed down his face. He was alone in the room, yet the feeling of a presence was overwhelming. The lullaby faded, leaving behind a haunting silence. The rocking chair stopped moving, and the room was plunged into darkness. The man stood there, a broken figure, consumed by a sorrow that was not his own. The child's spirit, once lost and tormented, was finding peace in the echo of a forgotten song. Yet, in this moment of solace, the man knew that his own nightmare was far from over. Chapter 13. The Frozen Moment. Time stood still. A frozen tableau of terror gripped the house. The man was suspended in a moment, a chilling tableau of despair. His breath caught in his throat, a frozen gasp of terror. The world outside the window was a blur, a meaningless canvas of color. The house was silent, eerily quiet. The creaking floorboards, the whispering walls, the haunting lullaby, all had ceased. There was only an oppressive stillness, a vacuum of sound that amplified the terror. The man's mind raced, desperately searching for an escape, a way out of this frozen nightmare. But there was no escape. He was trapped, a statue of fear in a world of ice. The child's spectral form hovered nearby, its eyes filled with an otherworldly sorrow. It was as if the child was mourning the man as much as the child itself. The darkness, once a creeping shadow, now filled the room completely. It was a tangible entity, a suffocating embrace that promised eternal night. The man felt a cold touch on his skin, a chilling caress that sent shivers down his spine. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, frozen in a moment of infinite dread. The world outside the window began to darken, a creeping shadow that mirrored the darkness within. The house was dying, and with it, a part of the man was dying too. He was a ghost in his own body, a silent witness to his own demise. There was no future, only the eternal present, a frozen moment of terror that would last forever. Chapter 14. The Final Warning. A whisper, cold and insidious, broke the frozen silence. It was a whisper of warning, a chilling premonition of what was to come. The man's senses, dulled by despair, sharpened in an instant. The house, once a tomb of silence, was alive with a sinister energy. Shadows danced with renewed vigor, taking on grotesque forms. They writhed and contorted, forming a menacing tableau of darkness. The floorboards groaned, their creaks a haunting symphony of impending doom. The air grew colder, thicker with a palpable sense of evil. The child's spectral form was gone, replaced by a darkness so profound it seemed to consume the light. A cold wind swept through the house, carrying with it the scent of sulfur. The man felt a surge of primal fear, a recognition of the inevitable. The house was changing. Walls seemed to shift, their shape distorted by an unseen force. Shadows converged, forming a menacing portal at the end of the hall. It was a gateway to darkness, a chasm leading to an unknown and terrifying abyss. A cold, metallic taste filled the man's mouth, a taste of fear and finality. He knew what was coming. It was a knowledge that was both terrifying and liberating. The end was near, and with it, a release from the torment. The house was preparing for its final act, a cataclysmic event that would consume everything in its path. The man was a mere spectator, a powerless witness to the house's descent into oblivion. Chapter 15. The Eternal Prisoner. The world imploded. A cataclysmic force erupted from within the house, a tempest of darkness and despair. The man was consumed by a blinding light, a searing pain that obliterated consciousness. When awareness returned, he was alone, suspended in a void of nothingness. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just an infinite expanse of darkness, broken only by the faintest glimmer of an unknown light. He was alone, a solitary speck in a cosmic ocean of nothingness. The house, the torment, the child, all were gone, swallowed by the abyss. Time ceased to exist. There was no past, no future, only an eternal present. The man was a ghost in a ghost world, a prisoner of his own mind. The darkness was not merely absence of light. It was a living entity, a cold, oppressive force that consumed him. He was aware of a presence, a malevolent intelligence that hovered at the edge of his perception. It was the house, transformed, its essence distilled into pure evil. It was a silent observer, a tormentor without form. The man was trapped, an eternal prisoner in a cosmic prison. There was no escape, no hope, only an endless expanse of darkness and the chilling presence of his tormentor. He was a forgotten soul, lost in the void, a haunting echo of a life consumed by terror. The house had won, and the man was its eternal captive, condemned to a life, or perhaps a death, of endless torment.